Hey everybody, how's it going? A while back, I made a video talking about adding more genre representation to the Smash roster. I covered a pretty good amount of video game genres, but I realized just how many I still had yet to talk about, and so I figured, why not finally make a part 2? Now, before we get into this, I want to remind people that these are just my own character picks based mostly on popularity in the genre mixed with a little bit of personal bias. If I don't talk about certain characters over others, it doesn't mean I dislike those characters, these are just the characters I decided to go with. So if you have any other character picks or genres that I might overlook in this video, feel free to leave a comment. I always love to see who people are rooting for to get into Smash. All good? Alright, let's get started then. Starting with beat 'em ups. This is probably the biggest genre that I didn't get to last time. Beat 'em ups are an integral part of the video game industry, especially in both the arcade and local multiplayer scenes. This genre had such a large influence on modern action games too, so I'm kinda shocked that we still have yet to see beat 'em up characters in Smash. Now when I say beat 'em up, I know that there have been many variations on the concept, but for this discussion, let's stick with the classic side-scroller beat 'em up. There are a ton of these that Smash could choose from. Streets of Rage, Final Fight, Battletoads, just to name a few, but I want to go with the series that really kind of started it all, Kunio-kun. Now, if you don't know who Kunio is, you might recognize the series by its Western name of River City. This series is one of gaming's longest running franchises, and it's still going strong to this day with newer entries like River City Girls. So if we're talking about which character would get in from this series, then it clearly has to be Kunio himself. I mean, the series is named after him after all. However, I do want to mention a couple of other characters that, while not directly from the River City franchise, have very heavy ties to the series. Double Dragon. Now, this series was actually intended to be a spin-off of the River City games before becoming its own thing. Despite this, the two series still share a lot of the same DNA, with the Lee brothers often appearing in various River City games. The reason that I'm bringing this up is because, while River City was one of the original founders of the beat-em-up genre, it can be argued that Double Dragon was the game that sort of brought about the golden age for these types of games. Hell, with how important Double Dragon was to co-op games, I thought for sure that Jimmy and Billy would have been a perfect use of the Echo Fighter concept. I think from a gameplay perspective, having a beat-em-up character would be extremely fun to have on the roster. I've always thought that the Smash roster could use more traditional brawlers, and yes, while we have characters like Lil Mac and traditional fighting game characters like Ryu and Terry, this would be the most true to the brawler archetype. Not only would you have a lot of hard-hitting melee combos at your disposal, but a beat-em-up character would also come with the ability to use items like bats or pipes, and even the ability to throw barrels and boxes at opponents. They would even be able to pick up knockdown opponents and throw them around the stage at other fighters. These gameplay elements could translate to Smash incredibly well and would make characters from the genre a welcome addition. Now, moving on from beat-em-ups, we have shoot-em-ups. This one's interesting because I've seen some people say that Smash already has shoot-em-up representation in the form of Star Fox, but I disagree. Star Fox is a 3D rail shooter that is vastly different from a shoot-em-up. Now, there are plenty of different shoot-em-ups out there that Smash could take from. You have the old school arcade games like Space Invaders and Galaga, and then you also have the so-called cute-em-up games like Twinbee and Fantasy Zone. However, there is a specific shoot-em-up that, while niche, has come up more and more lately when it comes to Smash roster discussion, and I think absolutely deserves a shot at getting in. That game series is Touhou Project. Touhou is often regarded as the bullet hell series, and once again, while niche, Touhou is simultaneously one of the biggest series in the shoot-em-up genre. While the series does have a bit of a cult following in the West, this would definitely be a roster addition tailored more towards the Japanese audience. When people talk about the Smash roster, indie characters come up a lot in terms of representation, and while we often seem to talk primarily about Western indie games, Touhou would be a great representation of Japanese indies. The character that would most likely represent the franchise would be Reimu Hakurei. She is pretty much the overall series protagonist, despite other characters leading various titles throughout the series. Mechanically, she would be a very projectile-heavy zoner, being able to have multiple projectiles in play at once. She would essentially be an extremely floaty glass cannon, prioritizing as much damage output as possible while also trying to receive as little damage as possible. Now, while this may sound like a very annoying character to deal with at surface level, Reimu's unique mechanic would mix things up a bit. In order to be even more faithful to the bullet hell genre, Reimu would have a great grazing mechanic. Grazing basically involves a character's hitbox being smaller than the actual character themselves, so when a projectile crosses over their model but doesn't necessarily connect with their hitbox, it grazes them. Typically in Touhou games, grazing has mostly been used as just a score multiplier. However, there have been multiple instances where grazing has been used to directly benefit the player in combat. I think how it could be implemented into Smash would be to give Reimu some sort of meter. Maybe her projectiles don't do a ton of damage right away, but the more meter she builds up through grazing, the stronger her attacks become. This would create more of a risk-reward playstyle that would force players to engage directly in combat more if they want to be able to increase their damage output. Alright, so even after all of that, I do want to touch on the fact that Reimu's chances of getting into Smash still feel extremely slim. Yes, Touhou does have a dedicated cult following, but it's still very niche. Even in Japan, it's somewhat niche. However, multiple Touhou spin-offs have been put on the Nintendo Switch, so the series does have some sort of presence on Nintendo consoles, and with how much Reimu has been coming up in Smash roster discussion, I wouldn't fully count out Reimu just yet. Next up, we have tower defense. This is a genre that I think I want represented in Smash the most, purely from a gameplay perspective. The idea of having a zoner that truly controls the stage with various constructs and defenses feels like it would add something really unique to the roster. Now, Nintendo actually has a tower defense rep of their own that already feels pretty close to Smash, Dylan from the Dylan's Rolling Western series. As far as Nintendo series go, Dylan is still fairly niche, although the series has gotten 3 entries on the 3DS. Dylan even has an assist trophy in Smash Ultimate. Coming from a tower defense game that leans more heavily on the action side of things, I think that Dylan could make for a great fighter even without his tower defense elements. However, I don't really think that Dylan's chances of getting upgraded to a full fighter are too high. For one, his moveset mostly consists of rolling into enemies to attack, which may feel a bit similar to Sonic, although I don't necessarily think that that would be a deal breaker for Dylan getting in. But the other factor is that the development studio Vanpool dissolved in 2023. I'm not sure if Nintendo still plans to use the IP in the future, but if Dylan's series has shared the same fate as his studio, I highly doubt he would be considered for Smash at this point. So even though Dylan's chances don't seem too high, there's also a ton of third-party offerings in the genre. Games like Kingdom Rush, Dungeon Defenders, Orcs Must Die, Bloons Tower Defense. Even the SteamWorld series started out as a tower defense game on the DSi. While many of these would be great representations for tower defense in Smash, for this one, I'm gonna have to go with a personal favorite of mine, Plants vs. Zombies. I remember when this game first came out and it quickly gained a ton of mainstream traction. This game has such a simple premise and is such an easy game to pick up and just start playing, and I think that's one of the main reasons that it blew up as much as it did. The first game has been ported to pretty much everything at this point, and the series has spawned multiple sequels and spin-offs and is still going strong to this day. So what exactly could Plants vs. Zombies bring to Smash? For starters, unlike what I said about Dylan being more action focused, a Plants vs. Zombies character would absolutely revolve around utilizing defenses and taking control of the stage. As for the character, I think it has to be Crazy Dave. Dave is the closest thing we really have to a main character in the series outside of the player. In the first game, Dave acted as a narrator for the game as well as instructing the player on multiple occasions. Dave runs a shop where he sells various plant upgrades, defenses, and other items, and I think that his playstyle would most likely involve him using all of the different plants in the game. For example, pea shooters would shoot projectiles at enemies, walnuts could shield from incoming damage, chompers could attack enemies that get too close, you get the idea. Dave would be able to plant these around the stage and then have them auto-attack enemies until they get destroyed. Now, of course, Dave would also be able to use basic melee attacks with items like the shovel or trowel, but his moveset would mostly be focused on stage control with the plants. We really don't have a zoner that is able to control the stage like that in Smash, so a tower defense character could add a really unique playstyle to the game. So this next one is interesting because while it is a genre, one developer clearly rules over this style of game. I'm talking about Souls-likes. Now, while this could be considered just another variation of the ever-popular action RPG, FromSoft truly managed to make a unique take on the genre, combining often brutal difficulty alongside much more precision-based movement and combat techniques such as dodge rolling, utilizing invincibility frames, learning and exploiting attack patterns of challenging bosses. There is a signature style style to these types of games, and because of that, it's managed to carve out its own niche. So while the Souls-like genre takes after From Software's popular titles and includes games such as Lies of P, Salt and Sanctuary, Lords of the Fallen, and even Hollow Knight, if a character from this type of genre were to eventually make it into Smash, I think it would just have to be a character coming from the games that created the genre to begin with. Now, while From Software has made other games very similar to the Souls series like Bloodborne and Elden Ring, I think that having a rep from Dark Souls makes the most sense. It's the series that people associate the genre with the most after all. I mean, that's what Souls-likes are named after. If I were to go with a character to represent Dark Souls as a whole, I think it would just have to be the Chosen Undead. I think having the main character of the first game just makes the most sense, as well as the fact that Dark Souls Remastered is currently the only Dark Souls playable on the Switch. However, if Chosen Undead got in, I could easily see Bearer of the Curse and the Ashen One being alt costumes. I think that the playstyle for this character could be really interesting as well. Having a character that focuses on high damage output but also needing to be highly evasive could make for a unique playstyle. Chosen Undead could even utilize the Estus Flask in their moveset in some way, or even Souls themselves as sort of a meter in order to bring more elements of this game into Smash. Either way, I really do think that the Souls character is more likely than people think, especially with how involved Bandai Namco is with the development of Smash nowadays. Alright, so this one is a bit of a broad category, but it's pretty much too big to not talk about. Sports video games. This is interesting because sports games are such a big part of video games as a whole, and yet whenever I see discussion for Smash characters, this genre pretty much never comes up. The only time that it ever does come up is when people seem to be making jokes like putting Tony Hawk himself in the game. While I unironically think that would be an amazing addition to the game purely for the absurdity of it, I highly doubt that Nintendo would ever put a real person into Smash. That right there is one of the main reasons that I think people don't consider sports reps for Smash, pretty much because all of the major sports franchises have you taking control of real-life pro athletes. I know Multiverses managed to add LeBron James into the game, but even then, it felt more like a joke pick due to him being in Space Jam 2. So assuming that Sakurai won't put a real person into the game at any point in time, who could be added to represent sports in Smash? I mean, there are sports games out there that utilize fictional athletes as opposed to real people. Games like SSX, Everybody's Golf, Inazuma 11, and even the majority of the classic sports games on NES use fictional characters. But here's the thing with that. If they were to add any of these characters to the roster, they would only be repping their specific sport. I have another idea in mind that I think would be a great nod to the genre as a whole while representing as many sports as possible. Just make a new Mii class. We already have Mii Brawler, Sword Fighter, Gunner, so why not have a Mii Athlete? They could even be based around Wii Sports specifically. Honestly, even the sports mates from Switch Sports would work too. Just having a character added to represent sports video games as a whole feels like the best way to rep the genre. I will say though, if there ever was a chance that Nintendo would add an actual real-world athlete to the game, then yeah, it should 100% be Tony Hawk. I think it would be really funny just seeing this real-ass dude punch Mario in the face. Before I move on to the last genre, I want to quickly talk about a few that didn't quite make the cut for this video. The first of which being Musou games. Let's be honest, if a Musou character was going to get into Smash, it would be a Dynasty or Samurai Warriors character. Koei Tecmo and Omega Force have complete dominance over this genre. In fact, it almost feels disingenuous to call it a genre when the Warriors games are pretty much the only titles that really utilize it. Now you could say, well, isn't the Souls series the same way? But here's the thing with Souls-likes. Although FromSoft clearly dominates the genre, that hasn't stopped countless Souls-likes from coming out over the years. With a lot of smaller action game developers, half the time it feels like a 50-50 chance that their game will be a Souls-like. With the Musou genre though, it feels like it's pretty safe to assume that if there is a Musou game, it's more than likely going to be developed by Omega Force. I will say this though about a Musou character in Smash. With how many Nintendo branded Warriors games there have been, I think that Nintendo has a pretty good relationship with Koei Tecmo at this point, so seeing one of their characters get into the game doesn't seem too far-fetched at this point. And then we have farming games. I was originally going to go in deeper with this one, but I realized how much of an overlap there would be with a farming character with Villager and Isabelle. Despite Animal Crossing not really being a true farming game, they use a lot of farming related moves in their respective respective movesets. But regardless of genre representation discussion, I still think that a farming character could be added to Smash at some point. There's an overabundance of farm games on the Switch, and the genre is super popular, especially among more casual audiences. If I were to pick a farming character to get into Smash, I think it would have to be Pete from Harvest Moon, the real Harvest Moon, which is now known as Story of Seasons. And finally, this one was just too weird to figure out how to translate to Smash: card games. Now, there are plenty of characters from within card games that I could see being made into fighters, but they wouldn't necessarily represent elements of the genre itself. I couldn't think of any way of incorporating cards into a character's moveset that didn't feel overly clunky and complicated. At one point, I almost considered Jimbo from Balatro. I had this idea where he would use the cards as projectiles or something and have sort of an RNG system like Hero, where he could choose from random jokers to augment his attacks. Okay, the more I say it out loud, the crazier it sounds. Anyways, let's move on to the final genre. So this last one is 100% just for fun. I don't see this one happening in any form, but I thought I'd talk about it anyway. So up until this point, I've talked about all these genres that Smash doesn't have yet within the roster. But what if Smash's genre itself were to join the roster? That's right, I'm talking about adding a platform fighter character to Smash. Now, my initial thought was to go with what many others have had the idea of as well, adding a character from Dragon King, Smash's prototype. And while that could work and be a fun nod to Smash's history, I think it would be more fun to add a character from an existing platform fighter. So what platform fighter would make the most sense? Well, you have Multiverses and Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl, which take characters from existing IP outside of video games, so that wouldn't really make much sense. Then you have PlayStation All-Stars and Fraymakers, but those take from existing video games, so it wouldn't really be a platform fighter original character in that case. I think the only option that makes sense has to be from one of my favorite platform fighters: Rivals of Aether. Adding a Rivals character would be pretty straightforward, especially pulling from Rivals 2. On the surface, the mechanics are extremely similar. However, Rivals has much more emphasis on competitive play compared to Smash Bros. Now, as for who would get added, there isn't really a specific main character of Rivals per se, so I'm gonna have to go with Orcane, my personal main. Orcane has already acted as the Rivals crossover character for a couple of other titles, so why not add Smash to that list? Orcane's moveset focuses heavily on stage control as well as complex combos. His signature puddle teleportation move allows him to recover easily, trap opponents, and follow up on combos. I highly doubt that a Rivals character would ever have a chance of getting into Smash, let alone a platform fighter character getting into Smash, but I think it could be a cool addition nonetheless. And that about does it for some more genres that could get added to Smash in the future. Now, I will say that I don't think that Smash absolutely needs these genres added to the roster, but I just see people talking about the same characters over and over when it comes to general roster speculation. So I think this is just a fun way to spice up the conversation a bit. Once again, I know I didn't exactly cover every genre under the sun, and I guarantee I probably overlooked some characters, so feel free to leave your own thoughts down in the comments. But for now, I think that's enough out of me. So if you guys like this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Later.